Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, guys, whether you're watching this stream on YouTube or on Rumble. And I'm very happy to see all the positive feedback on yesterday's stream and conversation with William van Wagenen. And this was one of the conversations that I had with an expert, and you liked it and you want me to have him regularly. So I will listen to you and I will try to have him as many times possible in the next weeks, as long as also he stays in Lebanon and he could deliver to us some of the updates from their front lines in the war-torn country, the country which is unfortunately witnessing many war, many destruction. I just want to say hello to Sabine, hello to Tiger, hello to Fred, hello to Johan, hello to Tony, and hello to Darker, GR33N, and hello Almir. All of you watching this live streaming on YouTube or on Rumble. And I would encourage you to stay till the end of this stream, because there is going to be a segment of a video by Francesca Albanese, which I cut from her last press conference at the UN, and she was challenged by two journalists. One of them was an Israeli journalist, and the other one, I'm not sure, but he is definitely a Western journalist. And I truly believe that Francesca is a serious UN rapporteur. She's a badass woman, sorry for the expression, but she's very competent in what she does. And there is another UN special rapporteur on Syria, and back then she issued a report on the negative impact of the US illegal unilateral coercive measures, sanctions on Syria, and she was also demonized. So any UN special rapporteur who does good job on exposing the fraud of the US and Israel and other allied countries who preach to us about democracy and human rights, but at the same time, they breach human rights, or they worsen the humanitarian situation in other countries due to their policies and sanctions. These people will be demonized. That's why I would like to shed light to what they say. And I'm 100% sure that if you turn on your TV channels, you are not going to see what Francesca Albanese, the special UN rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, has to say about the human rights in Palestine, and especially the human rights abuses by the Israeli occupation forces. On this channel, I expanded the work from Syria to Nagorno-Karabakh, then to Ukraine. And I have made it very clear from the beginning that I wasn't an expert on Ukraine. However, I have read extensively after 2014 what was going on in Ukraine. And I then realized that probably I know something more, one thing or more on Ukraine than other pundits. I was in Donetsk in 2015 during the peak of the war between the rebels in eastern Ukraine, in the Donetsk region, in Donbass, and Ukrainian armed forces backed by the neo-Nazi battalions. So I have said from the beginning in February 2022 that the Russian offensive on Ukraine has to stop, and there has to be a peace agreement between Russia, Ukraine, and by extension with the NATO countries. Because the core of the issue in Ukraine was not and is not and will not be about only Ukraine. It is NATO versus Russia, and it has everything to do about NATO's expansion to the east and the installation of the long-range missiles, some of which can carry nuclear weapons in Eastern European countries. And therefore, the United States has been using the territories of some of these countries as a proxy for its hegemonic, let's say, games of hegemony vis-a-vis Russia. So Russia invaded Ukraine after waiting probably 8 years to the Donetsk war, after the Donbass war, when over 14,000 Ukrainians and ethnic Russians have been killed by the Ukrainian forces and backed by the neo-Nazi battalions. And some people in Russia say Putin was late to invade Ukraine. I'm not going to judge these things. I'm not in support of invasions. I was all the time calling for a peace agreement from the beginning so that Ukraine can preserve its territorial integrity, its sovereignty, and at the same time, Russia would guarantee that the Americans would not expand their forces into Ukraine and would not establish a de facto NATO country or include Ukraine into NATO. There has to be some buffer zone between these two superpowers for the sake of humanity and for the sake of the stability in Ukraine, in Russia, and in extension in Eastern European countries. However, the peace agreement, which was ready for signature in February, March, April 2022, has been sabotaged by several powers, including Biden and Boris Johnson. And the result is what we see nowadays: over 600,000 Ukrainian men perished in a very avoidable war. This is an avoidable war. This was a war that should have never happened, and the Ukrainians have paid a huge price. However, when Russia launched its offensive, the entire Western mainstream narrative, and I'm focusing on Western mainstream narrative because they are the ones who sold this illusion first to their own people in the West, and secondly to the Ukrainian people, that Ukraine can and will win this war. And the second illusion that they sold to their own people, and then by extension to the Ukrainians, that Western countries, the United States and other NATO countries will support Ukraine, quote, as long as it takes until victory. The problem with this narrative was they didn't define what is as long as it takes, and they didn't define what is victory. This is a serious issue. When you want to define victory, you have to say, for example, Ukraine has to keep the Donbass region, for example, or capture Crimea, or kick out all the Russian forces, for example. If this was the plan all the way for victory, this meant that they want to defeat Russia militarily in Ukraine, and this would have necessarily caused a nuclear war, because I explained in length the importance of the Crimea and explained in length the importance of the Black Sea for Russia as an emerging superpower, and what it would mean for Russia if they lose Crimea. They would become a lesser or below regional power, because Russia's aspirations was, I'm above regional power and I'm going to become a superpower. And if they lose Crimea, they will become below regional power. So in the current state of affairs on the international scene, and with increasing powers of Russia, militarily, economically, socially, they had an aspiration to become a superpower, something that the United States doesn't like to see, a multipolar world, basically. Therefore, they have provoked this war to create a war of attrition in Ukraine, using the Ukrainian men as cannon fodders to fight against Russia. So they have sacrificed the Ukrainian people for this struggle of power against Russia. And 3 years later, less than 3 years, in February 2025, it's going to be 3 years for the Ukraine war. This has been a very devastating war for Ukraine. And this was devastating for ordinary Ukrainians and also ordinary Russians. Russians also lost a lot of manpower in Ukraine. And some of their territories in Kursk now is occupied by Ukrainian armed forces. And they are increasingly relying now on China. Probably I'm saying on North Korean. We don't have concrete evidence for it. I'm going to address that later in this stream. But Russia has managed to pursue a closer relationship with China, with India, with Brazil, with South Africa, with different countries such as North Korea, and Putin struck a defensive pact with basically, or strategic partnership with North Korea. In this case, if Russia comes under attack, then North Korea will come in defense of Russia and vice versa. So the world is changing quickly after the Ukraine war. And this was one of the reasons, in my opinion, why the Americans are investing big time in the Middle East, because they see that things aren't going well in Ukraine. They know very well that things aren't going well in Ukraine, and they want to make up for it in the Middle East by, in their mind, to strike a decisive victory against Iran or the Iranian-led axis of resistance, basically, in the region. They think that this is a region where they can score a victory. In my opinion, they will be disappointed as well in West Asia, because things have changed drastically also in West Asia. Iran has become emboldened. Saudi Arabia doesn't want to play games with the Americans against Iran. And many countries in the region are disgusted by what Israel is doing. Even Saudi Arabia says normalization is no longer on the table. And the Saudi foreign minister recently said that the Israeli occupation forces are committing a sort of an ethnic cleansing and genocide in northern Gaza. These statements are unusual from the Saudi side, taking into consideration that Saudi Arabia is a close ally to the United States, and they wanted to normalize ties with Israel, just like Jordan, Egypt, Bahrain, and the UAE. But Saudi Arabia is the most, let's say, important Arabic-rich country at the current moment, and they wanted to get something in return from the Americans in the context of a defensive pact. They wanted to strike a defensive pact with the United States, that the U.S. would be committed to defend Saudi Arabia on a strategic level, in exchange for the Saudis to strike such a security and diplomatic deal with Israel, something that has crumbled after the October 7. Now, after almost 3 years to the Ukraine war, the mainstream media, the security pundits, the military pundits, those who called an amateur like myself conspiracy theorists, those who called people like myself Putinists, Kremlin talking points, and all this stuff, because we warned from in February 2022 that Ukraine cannot win this war. Therefore, peace is the only way out of this, and the peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, and also a new security architecture or a security deal between the US and Russia, so that both sides prevail and can manage the security affairs in the region without having any accidents, especially that both countries are sitting on thousands of nuclear weapons. Now, in November 2024, the mainstream media started to change its rhetoric, started to change its tone, and they are slowly preparing the people for the upcoming major event in Ukraine. This article comes from The Economist. It says Ukraine is now struggling to cling on, not to win. So this first paragraph, I tried to highlight it. I don't know why it doesn't. I have a tool to highlight the paragraphs. So I'm talking about now this first paragraph. After 970 days of war, said Lloyd Austin, America's defense secretary, visiting Kiev on October 21st. He was in Kiev like 10 days ago. He said that Putin has not achieved one single strategic objective. And Mr. Austin offered confidence. He said, quote, Moscow will never prevail in Ukraine. So this is in public, right? This is what they say in public. They continue saying that Moscow will not prevail and they will support Ukraine as long as it takes and Ukraine will be victorious, etc. However, in private, his colleagues in the Pentagon, Western officials, and many Ukrainian commanders are increasingly worried about the direction of the war and Ukraine's ability to hold back Russian advances over the next 6 months. The problem, he says, the author, is not so much the loss of territory, how it is the steady erosion. This is very important. Look, so it's not only that they're losing territory, it's the steady erosion in the size and quality of Ukraine's forces. Ukrainian units are under strength and overstretched, worn thin by heavy casualties. Despite a new mobilization law that took effect in May, the army, outside a handful of brigades, has struggled to recruit enough replacements, with young men reluctant to sign up to tours of duty that are at best indefinite, and at worst one-way mission. This is coming from The Economist. It says that the Ukrainian men, the young men, they are reluctant to join the army because for them, joining the war now means a forever war or a one-way tour. Means you go, you never come back, or you go, you never come back, but you stay on the combat line. So many Ukrainians also decided to leave the country. And yes, you see that Ukraine is now introducing new, let's say, draft laws to force the men in Ukraine to join, but they have also a big demographic deficit in Ukraine, especially the ages of 18 and 25 year old. This is something that we are going to address now in this stream. But the Western powers who they call themselves allies of Ukraine, in this screen, look what they are encouraging Ukraine to do. Western partners are privately urging Ukraine's leaders to lower the mobilization age floor from 25 to increase the potential pool of recruits, but political sensitivities and fears over an already alarming demographic crisis stand in the way of any change. So the Western powers are urging Ukraine in private to decrease the law of recruitment or drafting from 25 years old and below in order to send more Ukrainian men into the meat grinder. And basically, this is something that I'm happy to see finally that the Ukrainian government is resisting, because this would be catastrophic for Ukraine's demographics. And please remember, guys, that there is a second day after the war. And if there is not enough men for reproduction and for the economy, the country is going to be on a dead end. The society is going to be on a dead end. The economy is going to be on a dead end. And therefore, the entire destiny of the country will be on a dead end. Ukraine Ukraine has become like a suicide mission, you know? They suicided Ukraine, an entire nation, a beautiful country with beautiful people. They have suicided it. They have forced Ukraine into this hell, basically. And now we are reading increasing number of pundits telling us Ukraine is now trying only to survive, not to win. And I have seen a very short video, which I'm going to show you later in this stream, of how the Russian army has been grabbing these territories. They have used this same tactique, let's say, in Syria, and in a war of attrition, slowly but surely grabbing territories. This situation is not going to be like some people expect, like complete crumbling of the Ukrainian forces, because this is not what Russia is doing. They're not carpet bombing, let's say, civilian infrastructure or in the civilian neighborhoods. In the contrary, they are slowly grabbing some territories. This is going to be better for them and better for the Ukrainians as an outcome of casualties, for example. So we're not going to see a scenario where, let's say, Kiev has crumbled, Zelensky has escaped. No, it's going to be a slow process. It's going to be a very painful process. But at the end, this is a dead end for the Ukrainians. So I really hope that people would wake up to this reality. I think the Ukrainians do already. So this is a paragraph that I couldn't highlight again, but we're reading here. The EU claims to be making more than 1 million shells per year. Russia is making 3 times as many and is also boosted by suppliers from North Korea and Iran. On manpower too, Russia remains solvent. Its army is recruiting around 30,000 men per month, says a NATO official. Russia cannot fight forever, but the worry among American, European, and Ukrainian officials is that Ukraine's breaking point will come first. That's true. The gloomy mood is evident in a shift in America's language. Senior officials like Mr. Austin still strike a confident note, promising that Ukraine will win. Those involved in the guts of planning in the Pentagon say that in practice, the ambitions of early 2023, a Ukrainian force that could take back its territory or shock Russia into talks through a well-crafted armored punch, have given way to a narrow focus on preventing defeat. At this point, we are thinking more and more about how Ukraine can survive, says a person involved in that planning. Very unfortunate situation. However, this article doesn't really point its fingers at who is to be blamed for this. Because if they start naming names like Biden, like Boris Johnson, this is going to have also repercussions on the election outcomes in these countries. So they always try to take away the blame. Who is to be blamed? I don't blame the Ukrainian civilians, to be honest, although I warned many of my Ukrainian friends of this inevitable result, but I know only few. However, they have been psyoped, Ukrainian people, to believe that they will emerge victorious from this. This is the thing. And please don't underestimate the power and the strength of the propaganda and the psyops. Do not underestimate that people can collectively be fooled to believe into certain things that are not true and can't be true. And the media, the propaganda was so big that even people who were in the middle or neutral, they thought that Ukraine can achieve certain victories against the Russian forces or push the Russian forces out of the Ukrainian territories. And the every talk and every argument that encouraged peace negotiations, diplomacy, has been framed as a Putinist talking point or paid by Kremlin. So now we are in November 2024. I hope this is on record and people see that honest journalists with integrity, people who cared about the Ukrainian people were really talking sense, and they wanted for the Ukrainians to have a better future than this. Now, even if the war stops today, now at this particular moment, the future looks very grim for Ukraine and for the Ukrainian economy and for the Ukrainian future, and especially for the Ukrainian people. And this is something that is unrepairable. There are things that you cannot really repair, especially if you lose hundreds of thousands of your men in the battlefield. There is another article published this week by Frank Lidvik. He is a senior lecturer in military strategy and law, University of Portsmouth. Now everybody is talking the same thing. Basically, Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. The best the West can do is help Kiev plan for a secure post-war future. So he has a friend who visited Ukraine recently, and he says that his friend, who is usually an intensely optimistic pro-Ukraine analyst, returned from Ukraine last week, and he told this author, it's like the German army in January 1945. The Ukrainians are being driven back on all fronts, including in the Kursk province of Russia. They are running out of soldiers. For most of 2024, Ukraine has been losing ground. This is the map that they show where the areas that they lost territories in Ukraine, the Ukrainian forces. Ultimately, this is not a war of territory, but of attrition. The only resource that counts is soldiers, and here the calculus for Ukraine is not positive. Low morale and desertion, as well as draft dodging, are now significant problems for Ukraine. These factors are exacerbating already serious recruitment issues, making it hard to supply the front lines with fresh troops. A dreadful debate is taking place in Ukraine. The question revolves around whether to mobilize and risk serious casualties to the 18 to 25 age group. This is the discussion going on now in Ukraine, whether they want to send to force Ukrainian men aged 18 to 25 to go to the front lines, basically. Mobilization and serious attrition of this group may be something Ukraine simply cannot afford, given the already serious demographic crisis the country faces. And even if this mobilization does go ahead, by the time the necessary politics, legislation, bureaucracy, and training have run their course, the war may be already over. Victory look impossible. History knows of no example where taking on Russia as an attritional contest has proved successful. Zelensky's maximalist war aims of restoring Ukraine's pre-2014 borders along with other unlikely conditions which were unchallenged and encouraged by confused by self-aggrandizing West. Finally, somebody is criticizing the West, and the Western officials, now he calls them confused, will not be achieved, and the West's leaders are partly to blame. European promises of millions of artillery rounds have failed to materialize. Only 650,000 have been supplied to Kiev this year, whereas the North Koreans have supplied at least twice that to Russia. So North Koreans gave around 1,300,000 shells to Russia only last year, plus what Russia can already produce, which is 3 times more than the Ukrainians. Only the US has significant stocks of weaponry in the form of thousands of armored vehicles, tanks, and artillery pieces in reserve, and it is unlikely to change its policy of drip feeding weapons to Ukraine now. Crucially, there will be no victory for Ukraine. Unforgivably, there is not and never has been a Western strategy except to bleed Russia as long as possible. So the strategy of the Western NATO governments was to bleed Russia as long as they could. However, I don't know if this was a miscalculation or it was calculated anyways, or they didn't care probably, that the major blow was hit to the Ukrainians. So they wanted to use Ukraine to bleed Russia, but the impact of it was that Ukraine lost hundreds of thousands of their men, and now they cannot really continue in this, and this is something unforgivable according to them, to this pundit, because crucially there will be no victory, and it wasn't even on the table to begin with, but this is the illusion that they sold to the people in Ukraine and to the European people to continue supporting this war. The problem, as so often before, is that the West has not defined what it considers a success. The cost, meanwhile, is becoming all too clear. Yeah, this is the thing that I mentioned at the beginning. They don't tell us what is as long as it takes and what's the definition of victory in this case. They just selling people words without any meaningful strategy how this war is going to end and what is the exit strategy, and if there is any diplomatic solution that we could be hopeful for. Nothing. They want to defeat Russia. How? Nobody knows. Because logically and realistically, to defeat Russia, you need to defeat them in a nuclear way. And Russia, to be defeated, and if it feels it is going to be defeated, they're going to resort to nuclear option. And I say defeat means an existential threat against Russia, right? And they have changed their nuclear doctrine recently as well to cope with the ongoing threats against the Russian security. So to have clearly defined its goals and limits would have constituted the beginnings of a strategy. And the West isn't good at that. NATO's leaders now need to move quickly beyond meaningless rhetoric or anything that smacks of as long as it takes. Oh, thankful. I'm happy to see somebody's repeating my arguments. We need a realistic answer to what something like a win, or at least an acceptable settlement, now looks like, as well as the extent to which it is achievable and whether the West is really going to pursue it. A starting point could be accepting that Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk are lost, something an increasing number of Ukrainians are beginning to say openly. Russia cannot possibly take all or even the bulk of Ukraine's territory. Even if it could, it couldn't possibly hold it. It is amply clear there will be a compromise settlement. So it is time for NATO and the US in particular to articulate a viable end to this nightmarish ordeal and to develop a pragmatic strategy to deal with Russia in the coming decade. This argument here, this is very important in my opinion, that Russia cannot take over all of Ukraine, and even if they could, they cannot really hold it. It's not possible for them to hold these territories. And this is one of the major arguments that I made about that if Ukraine loses this war, then the Russians will march to Poland, and then they will come to Germany and all this stuff. Russia cannot occupy Western Ukraine. Russia is not in a position to occupy even Western Ukraine and even if they could, they cannot hold it because it's a hostile environment. It's a hostile society for them. In order to occupy and hold the occupation or the capturing of any region, you need to have a friendly environment in this place or friendly social structures. And in these places, especially in Western Ukraine, it's very difficult for the Russians, even if they want to occupy these places, to hold them because the people are against them and there is going to be resistance against them. But the job, the task of capturing and occupying eastern parts of Ukraine, where there are majority ethnic Russians or Russian-speaking people, or Hungarians, Romas, and people who were persecuted by the Ukrainian government after the Maidan coup, this would be way more easy for the Russians to occupy and hold these territories without any meaningful resistance in this area. And this has proven to be accurate in the past, at least months, during the discourse of the occupation of the Russian forces of these territories. I will show you a very short video of in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbas region, how the situation has been proceeding for the Russians, starting from May 2024 till today, and you will see the war of attrition. How is the war of attrition that Russia is relying on is successful for them? Check. Yeah, of course, now that I want to play the video, it doesn't play. Just let's take another. So this is the, as you can see, it's a small grabbing of territory. And I think this is called the hammer strategy. I'm not a military expert on this, but as you can see that they're grabbing territories slowly and encircling some of the territories like this, and then grabbing them and sieging the Ukrainian armed forces. And so you can see how much territories the Ukrainians have lost in this during this time. Zelensky, he presented a victory plan to the West, right, recently. And in this victory plan, he apparently asked the Americans for Tomahawk missiles. I believe it was Tomahawk, right? So let me check. Yeah. So he asked the United States for Tomahawk missiles, and the Tomahawk missiles are capable of carrying nuclear warheads and have a range of 1,000 miles. And this was part of his victory plan. He visited the United States a few months ago and presented his new victory plan, and he asked them for Tomahawk missiles. So, and this was in a secret meeting between Zelensky and the American officials. However, the New York Times leaked to the press recently, and this was only this Tuesday, and they have leaked to the press and said that this demand by Zelensky to acquire Tomahawk missiles was totally unfeasible. So his demand has been rejected by the American officials, and this has been leaked to the press. But Zelensky was very frustrated and mad that his request has been leaked to the press, and he was angry, and he said, "This was confidential information between Ukraine and the White House. How should we understand these messages? So it means between partners there is nothing confidential," he said. So this is something that very important, because the Tomahawk missiles, which can carry nuclear weapons or nuclear warheads, would mean or could mean that Russia would respond in a non-conventional way. And this was something that the Russians said that if such a strike happens on Russia, such strikes would risk nuclear war. So I think that the Americans understood the risks. That's why they didn't accept to give Zelensky Tomahawk missiles. However, this part of no confidentiality is very important to understand the gravity of the issue here, that and how disappointed, let's say, Zelensky is. And he basically I mean, he has a big mouth. You know him now, his character and everything. And he went into public and he says, He says, Tomahawk, it was confidential information between Ukraine and White House. How to understand this message? So it means between partners, there is no confidential things. So I will play to you what he says in this case. He was a little bit frustrated.
Before the full-scale war, there are prevention things of so many leaders in the world, so many strong economies, so many strong countries, a lot of prevention steps. When I asked them in the victory plan to give me the package of long-distance weapon, and we will use it only if Russia will not stop the war and will not stop continuing escalation, I said, this is a prevention method. They said to me, this is escalation. When a lot of countries began to support victory plan, you see what's going on now in media, they said that Ukraine wants or wanted a lot of missiles like Tomahawk and etc. And but it was confidential information between Ukraine and White House. How to understand these messages? So it means between partners, there's no any confidential things.
I really don't know if I should feel sorry for him or pity or really it's like he wanted to sign this peace agreement in February. We don't know if he came under threats or he was persuaded, manipulated. It's so sad to see the state of affairs. And now he is disappointed that the Americans won't give him Tomahawk missiles, which could carry nuclear weapons because they are afraid of the reaction of Russia in this case. And we don't know if there is any correlation between the frustration of Zelensky and the recent UN General Assembly session on Cuba. So as you know, every year the UN General Assembly, they hold a meeting to call the United States, to call on the United States to stop the embargo on Cuba. Every year, basically the entire world asks the United States to lift the embargo and the inhumane siege on Cuba. And it's always United States, Israel, and some islands which vote against it. And I think last year, I'm not sure, I think last year Ukraine also voted against. But this year it seems that things have changed for Ukraine after this frustration with the United States. The UN General Assembly has voted overwhelmingly to end the US embargo against Cuba. Look at the countries. Every country in the world except for Israel and the United States, they have voted for lifting the sanctions. I don't know what countries is Republic of Moldova maybe. The UN General Assembly reaffirmed its demand that the United States lift the economic, commercial, and financial blockade against Cuba, with 187 countries voting in favor. Only the United States and Israel voted against, Moldova abstained, and Ukraine didn't vote. So Ukraine didn't vote. I was trying to see where Ukraine is in the map, but in these countries, but I didn't see basically. So I'm trying to check again. It seems that they didn't vote. There is always desperate puppet. Sorry, this is what the comment from our friend German here. So this is the state of affairs in Ukraine. They also say that the US has transferred only 10% of the aid approved by Congress in April 2024 to Ukraine. And this was claimed by Zelensky, that you promised us and you signed to send us this security aid package to Ukraine, and only 10% of it arrived. So he says, like, you do your job, you count on reserves, you count on special brigades, you count on such equipment, and if you get 10% of all the package that has already been voted on, it's not funny. So he says that only 10% the United States sent him the aid that he was promised. And this is the video where he says this basically, that the United States again probably betrayed him by sending only 10% of what he was promised.
Preparing that country for the winter, which is crucial, which is big challenge, very big challenge for us, because it will be the third winter with blackouts, with everything. So this is the problem. And then you said what to do, for example, when Russia gains or something, some steps forward on the east. This is the same. You do your job, you count on reserves, you count on special brigades, you count on such equipment. And if you got 10% from all the package, been even voted already. You know, that it's not funny, but it's you know, but the Congress voted. I mean, it's not a question of money. It's also always the question with bureaucracy or logistic, with ideas or with skepsis, with this weapon is good, this weapon is bad, this we will give you, this is not, this is cross of red lines, this is what Putin's reaction will be, you know?
For him, this is not funny. I'm sure that this is also not funny for the commanders, the officers, and the soldiers on the front lines when they have a shortage of weapons and they have been expecting deliveries of weapons and supporting Ukraine as long as it takes, promises after promises after promises, which only little of it has reached in Ukraine. And now the front lines are crumbling when the Ukrainians are waging an offensive in Kursk. This is why I said they have suicided Ukraine, basically, right? They have sent it into a mission of suicide. And on the other hand, we have claims coming from Ukraine and NATO intelligence community. This is something I cannot verify. I haven't seen any evidence yet from Kursk or from anywhere in Ukraine about the presence of North Korean soldiers. I haven't seen any, but if I see, I will confirm it to you. However, I have to report it to you because this is in the press. And Zelensky says that Russia confirmed to the West that North Korea is taking an active part in the war against Ukraine. And this is the allegation comes from Zelensky himself. So he says the Russian Federation at the level of intelligence confirmed that North Korea is involved in the war. Russia has been talking about this with the West. North Korea had sent troops to Russia to participate in its war against Ukraine and deployed them in Kursk Oblast. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, as well as the Pentagon, confirmed on October 28. Some 3,000 North Korean troops are already in Russia's Kursk Oblast. Meanwhile, Kiev expects their number to increase to 12,000, Zelensky said. I personally haven't seen it. I want you to tell me if this is correct or not, if you've seen any evidence for it, or any proof. Evidence or proof or anything that could indicate that North Korean fighters and soldiers are on front lines or even beyond front lines, are helping, assisting Russians. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it. I'm not going to say this is correct or not correct. I want to see the evidence or the proof for it. So if you see anything like this, guys, please let me know. Sarah, she's, of course, for Rutte. I would like to tell you something about Rutte as well. Rutte has been under investigation, which he ordered then the investigation to be closed. And he basically sent 90 million euros of aid to terrorist groups in Syria, one of which is called Jabhat al-Shamiyya. And Jabhat al-Shamiyya was labeled as a terrorist organization by the Netherlands itself. So Netherlands government classifies a group as a terrorist organization, then sends money, aid. They call it non-lethal aid, but this non-lethal aid included laptops, communication, and tracks, these four-wheel tracks that could be used for combat reasons. So Mark Rutte's government and he himself, they secretly funneled 90 million euros to terrorist groups in Syria to fight against the Syrian government. And then when the Dutch press noticed it and investigated it, they launched and opened an investigation against Mark Rutte, and then he suppressed the investigation. So I think he would be really a good fit for NATO based on his credentials and past. I've been saying also on Syriana Analysis that there is probably a plot in the US deep state, by the US deep state, that they see that things aren't going well in Ukraine, so they want to freeze the conflict in Ukraine, freeze it, not to end it, to freeze it. That's why they want for Trump to come to power, or there are some powers who want for Trump to come to power to freeze the conflict in Ukraine, to focus on the Middle East against Iran. And I think that the Russians know about this, and they have realized it, basically. And this was expressed by the ambassador of Russia in the UN, who basically says, no freezing the front and no NATO in any form. Russia slams the Western plans for Ukraine and urges people to think about the people of Ukraine, not about Zelensky. I think that here the Russians realize that the Americans want to freeze the conflict in Ukraine and for a few years to focus on the Middle East and then come back. So he has to say something about it. Take a look.
Никакой заморозки фронта для того, чтобы режим Зеленского мог залезать рано, не будет. Как не будет и вступления Украины в том или ином виде в НАТО. Все цели нашей СВО, включая демилитаризацию и денацификацию Украины, остаются в силе и не меняются. А вот что меняется, причем стремительно, так это размер территории, остающейся под контролем киевского режима. Советую всем, кто радеет за своих украинских подельников, не забывать об этом. И думать не о клике Зеленского, а об украинском народе, долгосрочные интересы которого состоят в мире и добрососедстве с Россией. Пока же это у наших западных коллег плохо получается. Благодарю вас.
So the Russians also feel like they're emboldened due to their military victories or successes in Ukraine. Now they don't want to freeze the conflict. They want to find a conclusive solution for the Ukraine question. And I think that would be for the best interest of Russia, Ukraine, and the NATO countries to find a decisive, conclusive solution, and not to freeze it and then come back to it a few years later. You know, we don't want for this conflict to continue. We don't want for the Ukrainians to continue dying for this worthless war. And we want for the European people to coexist. I think this is something that would benefit everyone, but who am I to judge? If you stayed till the end of this live streaming, I told you that there is a video I'm going to show you of Francesca Albanese, and she held a press conference recently, I think yesterday, in the UN. And I cut two segments of this video, which I'm going to show you now. I think this is very important for us to see, and how she's confronted with questions and what she answers. We are focusing mostly recently on what's happening in Palestine and the Middle East. And today I wanted to speak a little bit more about Ukraine, but I want to end this stream with her video. So let's start with the first segment.
Madam, Mike Wagenheim with I-24 News. It's been a while since we've last spoken. A couple questions for you. In your report, you have a line in here that says that since its establishment, Israel has treated the occupied people as a hated encumbrance and threat to be eradicated, and you go on listing other items. We'll leave aside the contextual and factual debate about that. Based on that statement, it seems to infer that you believe that Israel has been an occupier since the day of its birth. Is that your position? You said since its establishment, Israel has treated occupied people, etc. Are you inferring that Israel has been an occupier since 1948?
Why do you have to infer instead of sticking to what I said? And
I'm asking, that's what's in there.
Let me elaborate.
Okay.
Israel has taken, and I can concede that it has done it with the recognition of the General Assembly, but from a human rights law point of view, and as I take a people-centered approach, I cannot forget it. The creation of the State of Israel has meant the dispossession of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who have been kicked out of their homes and never allowed to return. Why so? And does it make it an occupier? it makes a state, it makes of Israel a state who has forcibly displaced significant part of the native population. And this is the past that has never been addressed. The Palestinians with Israeli citizenship who remained in Israel have been kept for 2 decades under military rule. And this is why when I say an encumbrance, I was not even referring to them, but as you ask, I mean, this is documented, so it's not debatable, it's history. And since 1967, which is what I'm most interested in because of the mandate I have, Israel has continued these practices, has extended the custodianship system that had been used to take control of all the properties left behind by the Palestinian refugees, but without time limit. So from 1967, I think this is Military Order 58, or one of the early military orders, Israel has been able to seize and acquire all the property left behind by the Palestinians. The 350,000 were forcibly displaced outside the occupied Palestinian territory in 1967, and the hundreds of thousands who have been kicked out of their homes and lands ever since. So there's been a continuity. So it's not just about what has been happening in the occupied Palestinian territory for the past 57 years. It's the fact that, unfortunately, there is a continuity with patterns of conduct that had already been enacted in modern-day Israel.
Thank you very much, Stefano Vaccaro, La Voce di New York, Ital Press. I'm sorry because I arrived, I think you had started already a few minutes, so I don't know if you talked about it, but I heard about when you were talking about the Israeli government accusing you to be anti-Semitist, but here of anti-Semitism, but did you respond did you respond to the tweet that Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield wrote yesterday? She wrote that, as a UN Special Rapporteur Albanese visit New York, I want to reiterate the US believes she is unfit for a role. The United Nations should not tolerate anti-Semitism from a UN-affiliated official hired to promote human rights. This is the ambassador of the United States at the United Nations. What's your response to
I have the same shock that you have looking at how the United States is behaving in this context, in the context of the genocide that is unfolding in Gaza. I'm not surprised that they attack anyone who speaks to the facts that are frankly on our watch in Gaza, and they do that so brutally because they feel called out, because it's not that the United States is simply an observer. The United States is being an enabler in what Israel has been doing. So of course they have a conflict of interest in this, let's say, orchestrating attacks against anyone who criticizes Israel. But besides this, I really don't feel comfortable at entertaining any longer discussions concerning the attacks against me, because it's not about me, and I'm not the story. The story is the fact that there are Palestinians who risk to be erased from their land. The questions that journalists should ask, I mean, this is what I would expect. How do you comment on the fact that Israel has passed laws that outlaw a UN organization? Because other member states who have even a worse record than Israel could do the same. Human rights record than Israel could do the same. Or how do I comment the fact that Israel there has been a plan to erase Palestinian presence from northern Gaza, and the fact that Israel is freely talking about going back to Gaza and reoccupy Gaza, while the International Court of Justice has recognized that the occupation is illegal and must go. Unequivocally and totally. This is what I want to talk about, because if we keep on entertaining discussions on is she an anti-Semite or not, I'm sorry. Think what you want of me. I will do my job until I have this mandate, and that is it.
Just a quick follow-up. Just to say that this is about what you have to cover, in the sense if I understood you saying basically don't focus on me, focus on what I denounce in my reports and so on. But if I understand that a special rapporteur is effective or could be effective if it maintains if appears, not only his, but appears neutral, or they can, talk to both sides. So for now we're seeing that U.S. ambassador, and it's a personal tweet, it's a tweet attacking you. So my simple question, and it's not a personal question, it's about your work as a rapporteur.
Yeah.
In the last, let's say, 1 year, could you have done something different? Do you think you could have done something different to maintain your, to be more effective in be able to talk to both sides?
But you seem to be someone who measures effectiveness in talking to both sides, and I don't even understand who both sides are. So can you be more specific on who are the both sides?
I'm talking as a journalist. I'm not talking as
I know, but you ask me
as
questions,
a journalist,
you use
and
words.
say that we see if we do a research, we as a journalist have to quote our source and everything. And unfortunately, I say unfortunately, your name now, when we quote in our article, because according to the report that Albanese wrote, unfortunately, you are considered, not by me, but by what happened in the situation that we have also that, I don't remember Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield do an attack like this for anybody on Twitter. Unfortunately, it doesn't make your work, your reports, what you're denouncing any more effective.
But this is your opinion. How do you measure effectiveness?
Well,
Look, let's cut it short. First of all, there is an inaccuracy, and I have to be clear about that. And I don't want to put the spot on you, but because and thank you for that. It gives me the opportunity to clarify. But an independent expert of the United Nations with a human rights monitoring mandate is not requested to be neutral. It's requested to be impartial. It's different. It's different. Tell me how I am partial, because I am the only special rapporteur who has investigated violations of international law committed by Hamas in my second report and the Palestinian Authority. And I've tried to visit the prisons run by the Palestinian Authority, and I was prevented from doing so by Israel, and who prevented my visit. And if you look at the terms of reference of my resolution, of the resolution creating this mandate, my mandate obliges me to look at the violations committed by Israel. So when you say talk to both parties, but I understand what you are trying to say. I should maintain a position that allows me to be listened to by all member states. And this is what I've done until March this year. I've had the discussions with everyone. In March, already 30,000 Palestinians had been killed, and it was clear that it was not in the horizon that this would stop. And again, I speak. What do? I tell the facts, and I point to the responsibilities of member states. Of course, member states are not pleased with it. So I don't particularly I'm not sensitive to the fact that any ambassador criticizes my work. It seems that there is also some misinformation about the work of Special Rapporteur. The Special Rapporteur on Iran receives criticism by Iran. The Special Rapporteur on Myanmar receives criticism by Myanmar. What is unique here is that Israel is the only state that is absolutely protected and cocooned by most of the West, what Craig Mohiber calls the settler colonial bloc. And my mandate is the only one who, in fact, stands looking straight in the face at Western states. So again, I take your criticism. Next time, try to be a special rapporteur on the OPT, and maybe you will be more effective than me.
She crushed, in my opinion, both of them. And I wanted to show you this video to see how some journalists can be lacking integrity and how could they be there as a plant. You know, they are planted there to disrupt the conference and try to confront the UN reporter. Imagine after more than 1 year of the slaughterhouse in Gaza and then moving to Lebanon, there are journalists who want to question her credibility or call her an anti-Semite. And I wanted to show you to see how can you respond when you are faced with such questions, and how you could be also a person of integrity and brave to not care about these allegations and these accusations. I was at some point very sensitive to such accusations. I've been accused of being so many things like conspiracy theorist and Assadist, far right, a fascist, all this stuff. Like you could ever imagine. Like I was called all sorts of names, and it affected me, impacted me. It impacted my mental health, and I was really worried about them. Now, if a criticism comes like this is not a criticism. This is such a slandering or character assassination or trying to paint me in some certain way by people who support genocide, by people who support the ethnic cleansing, by people who support unconditionally what Israel is doing, for example. Why would I care about them? I don't really see these people as honest, as people with integrity. I don't see them as people who stick to their humanity. I truly see that they could justify anything and everything. So this would be my final thoughts for today. This is going to be our last live streaming for this week. And on Monday, we're going to do another live streaming again at the same time. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's live streaming. I appreciate all of you. I wish you a happy weekend, for all of you, peaceful weekend. Before leaving this live streaming, I would really appreciate it if you could hit the like button and check if you're subscribed. Still 60% of the viewers of Syriana Analysis aren't subscribed. That would be a great help for me. And if you want to support this work, the independent work I'm doing, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And I will see you on Monday. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam. And before I go, tonight at 10 p.m. Central European time, I'm going to be on Mahmoud Od's YouTube channel. We're going to have a live discussion on his YouTube channel. So if you're interested, you can tune in to Mahmoud Od's YouTube channel, and we will have a discussion about Middle East, West Asia again. So take care. Salam.